Hello, and welcome to Meet the Author, presented by the North Little Rock Public Library System. I'm Derek Cash with North Little Rock's Lehman Library, and joining me today for a second time is Carla McClafferty, author of Fourth Down in Inches, Concussions and Football's Make or Break Moment. Thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Before we do anything, I would like to have you start by reading a section from the book so that,
Great.
And I'll be quiet and you go from there.
I'd love to. This is really the explanation of what a concussion is, which is very important to understand this book. So here goes. The player lines up. He concentrates on his job. He anticipates his opponent's move. His blood is pumping. The ball is snapped. Instinct and memory of countless hours on the practice field take over. Like instruments in an orchestra blending together to play a symphony, every part of the player's body is working in perfect harmony. In the player's brain, 100 billion neurons are sending and receiving messages at lightning speed to make it all happen. Heart beats, lungs breathe, pick up your feet, move your arm, look at the coach, remember the play. The neurons transmit these messages through a long fiber called an axon that is attached to each neuron. This information moves down the axon through an orderly chemical process. When the message gets to the end of the axon, a neurotransmitter transmits the message to the next cell, and so on and so on. Then, bam, an outside force causes the player's brain to crash into the side of the skull. Then the brain bounces off and crashes into the other side of the skull. The brain, which has been busily transmitting countless messages, immediately reacts to the crisis. A chain reaction begins as chemicals in the brain move around in chaos. Message-carrying neurotransmitters are interrupted before they reach the axon. Suddenly, the brain can't send or receive messages normally. Sometimes it happens as a result of a hard hit that everyone notices and leaves the player unconscious. Other times it happens as a result of a minor routine play that no one but the player notices. The player could feel confused, have blurred vision, see stars, be off balance, feel nauseous, or many other symptoms. Football players describe these symptoms as getting a ding or getting their bell rung. To a neurologist, however, a traumatic brain injury has interfered with the normal function of the brain and caused a concussion.
All right. I'm so glad you picked that part because it pretty well gives the theme of the book. And so for the audience that's watching, they know that what we're going to be discussing will be about concussions. All right. I think the whole book I found was fascinating. It really was. And I think you do a very good job of giving a history. Now, before we go any further, and Carla, you'll back me up because you said this book is not for or against football. It just happens that a lot of concussions happen with football. But you bring up a history of football, and I was amazed. In 1905, there were 19 deaths from football.
Right.
I mean, I can't imagine that many deaths occurring today and the game still be played, that sort of thing. What was your reaction when you got those statistics, or what do you think of it?
It's really interesting. 1905 is a pivotal moment in the history of football. The game had been played for about 30 years by this point. But by 1905, there was a lot of rough football, even rougher than it is today. One of the reasons is the rules. Some of the rules hadn't been changed yet, and they would get in a big huddle and move as one. It was called the flying wedge, and all of the players would huddle together and they would just mow down the opponents. And there was a lot of hitting, a lot of punching, a lot of kicking and stomping. So there was a lot of very aggressive play. That's not what happens today. But in that year, 1905, there were 19 deaths. But those deaths continue still today.
Yeah. Having said that, though, I know you a little bit, and you don't strike me as being much of an athlete. and I don't mean that as an insult, just an observation.
It's true.
What piqued your interest so that you wrote this book? Why did you write the book?
Well, the reason I wrote the book is I had an excellent editor at Carol Rhoda, which was my publisher for this book. And he contacted me one day and said, I really would want you to think about writing a book about concussions in football. And I said, oh, you have the wrong person for this, because I'm not a huge football fan. So he said, well, I want you to think about it. Would you think about it? And you will either be so uninterested you don't want to do it, or you just don't want to do it, and or you will be so much better at it than someone who is a rabid football fan. And I considered that, and I thought I can write a book that tells both sides of this story. About, it's not a book, as you said in the intro, it's not for football or against football. It's just about concussions in football. And so that's kind of how it started. Is my editor said, you are the one to write this book. And so I finally agreed.
Well, one thing I noticed about the book is that you could have, and you didn't, you could have made it so medical or so scientific that no one would have understood it. But there are different stories. And then you do talk about the medical aspect, but it just makes it anyone who can read could understand it. And I say that as a compliment to you as a writer.
Thank you. It's a difficult task because this is an extremely complex topic, and there's a lot of neuroscience in it. There's a lot of parts to it, and to explain that in a way that when I write, I think about what does an average 10-year-old understand. So I really try really hard, I work really hard to make all of these extremely complex points of science reasonable and understandable. So that's what I try to do.
Okay. Now, the book is a few years old, and so maybe I'll ask this question. Has anything changed significantly or even minutely in terms of medicine and or the safety for the game?
There's not a lot of changes since the book came out. I would say the rules continue to be redefined to bring more safety in mind to the game. There is more attention, I think, paid to concussions as a whole in society. There is, I think, a better wave of coaches that are trying to teach tackling and blocking safer. And then, of course, the equipment has gotten better. Helmets have gotten better, but of course, helmets will never, ever prevent all concussions. But there's a renewed interest in getting those helmets that fit properly, and all of that does help.
I'm so glad you said that. I was amazed to read in your book that helmets do not prevent concussions. And I guess it's because, and you're the expert, you wrote the book, but the brain is being knocked, and all the helmet does is just, well, I'm speaking for you. You comment on that.
Absolutely. The helmet, really, the purpose of the helmet is to hopefully prevent a skull fracture. Okay. And the reason that even though they're better all the time, the materials are better, the fit is better, all of that is improving. The reality is your brain inside your skull is surrounded by cerebral spinal fluid, and that protects us in the normal bumps of life. But when you have a jolt that sends your brain is gelatinous, as if it was, have you ever had Jell-O that was thick enough you could pick up and eat? Yes. It's that consistency your brain is. So when your brain that is gelatinous is in the middle of that swimming, so to speak, in the cerebral spinal fluid, when you have a jolt, it rushes to the side of your head and of your skull, and then it bounces back. But if you were hit, and that's if you were hit totally straight on your forehead, but if you were hit from the side, not only would your brain bounce back and forth, it would twist and bounce back and forth. That bouncing, that twisting tears cells, and that's what causes a concussion.
Okay. All right. All right. Another amazing thing I found out from your book is that girls, according to the statistics at the time, suffer from concussions more than boys. Do they know why or how or?
Well, there is not, it's not just a football issue.
Mhm.
Concussions can happen just walking across the floor and falling on your head. But the reason that statistic is sort of important is number one, concussions happen most in football and boys football, but girls soccer is very high in concussions, and they have statistically relative to each other in the sports that boys and girls both play. Girls report concussions more than boys. The experts don't know exactly why. They have a couple of theories. One theory is that perhaps boys' neck muscles are stronger, maybe. The other thing is perhaps girls will report them more often.
Yeah.
So, there's not really truly an answer, but those are the two theories.
You say that it makes you think, boys, tough it out.
Yes.
I've got a pain, but you don't run to the
Exactly.
doctor. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Has there been any, pardon me, has there been any changes in diagnosing concussions?
Not really,
Okay.
because I think there's a misconception about concussions. Because I hear just anecdotally, I hear people say this all the time. Well, somebody got knocked around in a football game and they did an MRI or CT. Oh, well, good, there's no concussion. But a CT or a MRI scan does not prove or disprove a concussion, because concussions is a function of the brain. It's not blood, it's not swelling, it is a function of the brain. So you could rule out with those tests, you could rule out bleeding in the brain, but you can't rule out a concussion. And concussions are diagnosed through the signs and symptoms.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. I thought what was really interesting was that you can have a lack of symptoms of a concussion and the player can keep playing the game. And I was just thinking, it's one of those things, well, if you don't feel any symptoms, then why not continue to play the game? But based on what you've read or written in the book, it's just you're running right into another train, two trains getting ready to smash each other. And I thought, what can you tell a boy or a girl that just doesn't feel any symptoms, but they keep playing a game? Yeah.
Well, I think that's another sort of misconception in the world, is that a concussion happens from a hard hit. That's what people kind of think. The reality is that it is repetitive brain trauma that is very dangerous. Now, certainly you can get a concussion from a one hit. You'd never been hit before, but it's the experts in the field, and I interviewed every expert that I wrote about. I interviewed them myself. They all know from their work that it is repetitive brain injury that is the problem. It's the bigger problem than a single hit that causes you to have a concussion. Because another statistic that's really powerful is that that there's so many kids that play football, and there's 1.1 million high school kids that play football. And the other statistic that is, that I think has to, even in 2021, and that was kind of a COVID year, there were 4 deaths of high school football players in this country in 2021. So, it's a problem of repetitive brain injury, and it's estimated that if a boy plays football for 4 years in high school and 4 years in college, they probably have 8,000 hits to the head. 8,000.
I can't imagine that many hits. Wow.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Much more.
Mhm.
And you know, some people think, well, they only get hurt in a game, but that's not true either. It's
Yeah.
practice too.
Practice, yeah. You've got a patient before you who's been diagnosed with concussion. What is the treatment?
It's rest. It's rest, not only physical rest, but it's cognitive rest. So if they're really having concussion symptoms, and there's 26, and they're not all the biggies that you think of, like a massive headache or vomiting or anything. It could be something as simple as not being able to sleep. There's 26 different symptoms that it could be, signs or symptoms. And so the treatment is resting their brain. And so that really means when they truly have a concussion, no television, no reading, no schoolwork. They need to rest their brain and their bodies, but it's really about that cognitive rest. And then 80% of all concussions resolve in 7 to 10 days.
Oh, okay.
So the overwhelming majority, you know, week and a half, they're fine. Okay. And then they slowly return to play.
Okay. I'm so glad to hear you say that. Not because that you can recover, because I was going to ask that question, and it's like maybe a broken leg. You can, if your proper treatment, etc. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And most do. 80% do.
Okay.
But there are some who have post-concussive problems, and that's long-term concussions. But it's usually someone that has had more than one concussion, repeated brain injury.
Yes. And for the audience, I'm going to say this: in order to know a little bit more about that, you've got to read the book, because Carla brings up some stories, tragically sad, about young boys who were severely injured and the results that happened. So it's, even though there is an encouraging thing about it, there are some tragic things too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. If you're willing, I want to read something from your book. And I'm going to read it, and then I'll ask for your comment.
Okay.
This is about Connie Stiles, who lost her son. And I'm quoting. It says, but if there had been, his mother would not have... After Nathan's death, there was no talk of banning the game. This was about Von Gammon. But if there had been, his mother would not defend football the same way. Perhaps because football was not the most cherished object in Nathan's life. To him, it was just a game. Connie Stiles believes risk is part of everything in life, including football. She also believes you can't live life in fear. She hopes players, coaches, and parents will become better informed about the danger of concussions.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way possibly most parents of football players would think, probably. But you know, it's a horrible thing that happens sometimes, and you know, it's nobody's fault, and so that is a very kind way for her to approach this. They're wonderful people. I got to know them. I got to know the Pelleys, who also let me talk about their son Eric in this book, and there's just there, you know. I tell people, the people think they're going to win the lottery, but they never think it's their son that's going to be the one that dies on a football field. So, you know, the chances of winning a lottery are far great, you know, that those are astronomical, but people believe they're going to be the one. So it's just the way of life, and people accept the risk, just like we accept the risk of everything. It's just that this is a game that you want your children to enjoy.
Yes.
You know,
and along those same lines, it's more or less like the child that falls off the horse. Put them back on the horse instead of maybe being afraid. And her attitude, at least struck me, was that way with football. Accidents sometimes happen, but it's not going to rule us. We're going to rule it.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Well, Carla, this has been, before we can, I was going to say, this has been a pleasure, and it has been. Tell us how people who are watching this program, how they can contact you if they want to purchase this book. Are you in social media? How they could purchase the book?
Yeah, for sure. It's where books are sold. You can order it online or through a bookstore, of course. I'm on social media. I have a website, and I have a blog, and so lots of. If you spell McClafferty with 2 C's, it's easy to find.
All right. Well, once again, thank you. And thank you for joining us today. It has been a pleasure. If you're interested in reading more from Carla McClafferty, please visit us at the library or find us online at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or our website, nlrlibrary.org. Join us again next time and have a great day, everyone.